There's a feeling that a lot of people in my generation carry, that somehow our parents had it better.
Not because they were smarter, not because they worked harder, but because the world they inherited just offered a deal that was fair. And if you've ever looked around and thought, why does life feel so much harder now than it used to be?
I don't think you're crazy. I think you're noticing something very real.
I want you to get up now.
Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes. What jobs we hate, we buy shit we don't need.
All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it! My life has value!
Huh?
It's 3:30. Why don't you work?
Because I didn't feel like it.
Peter, what's gotten into you?
After World War II, countries like Canada, the US, and much of Europe experienced something rare: a few decades of rapid, broad-based economic growth.
Not toward the rich society, but upward to the great society.
The post-World War II economy was one of the most prosperous times in modern history.
In order to have a proper appreciation of the American economic system, we must know how the national income is divided in America.
From the 1950s to about 1975, the economy boomed. Wages grew with that boom, and inequality actually declined.
These towers behind me, some of the most iconic buildings in downtown Toronto, were built during that era as a physical manifestation of that boom.
A typical household could afford a car, a house, maybe even a cottage, often on just one income.
Well, I'm satisfied with the conditions that I'm living in now.
This period is often called the golden age of capitalism.
I'm very, very happy. I don't have much that I can complain about.
Unions were strong.
The United Steelworkers of America is the proudest union in the world.
Jobs were secure. Public investment was massive.
Today, John Smith of Gloucester can leave his family in the morning and travel safely and quickly over a modern express highway to his job.
And entire towns were built around new industries.
The future actually looked brighter than the present, but it wasn't perfect, of course.
Inequality still existed. Discrimination was rampant, and the benefits weren't shared equally, especially by race, gender, or region. But overall, average people saw rising standards of living year after year.
So, what made that possible? And why does it feel like it's now slipping away?
The thing is, this wasn't random. It wasn't just that people worked hard or made better choices. They had help from the structure of the economy itself.
How? Well, a popular theory right now is that these good economic times existed for the average person because we did something that a lot of people are calling for today.
We taxed the rich. A lot. Rates of taxation in the highest tax bracket were over 90%, and we used this money to fund massive public spending initiatives that created massive amounts of public good.
Our taxes must be sufficient to pay for city streets, health, fire, and police protection.
It was a rare case of a government actually allocating capital efficiently.
Yes, I did just say government and efficiently in the same sentence. Absolutely f***ing crazy, right? But it's not actually what created this golden age of capitalism. It's not what enabled our parents and grandparents to have the lives that they did. Don't get me wrong, it certainly helped, but it wasn't the main reason.
The real reason was because we were riding the wave of a very specific kind of economic growth, one which appears innocent and beneficial, but has very severe costs. Economic growth doesn't just happen because people work harder. People have always worked hard. Real growth, the kind that improves the lives of regular people, comes from a change in something known as productivity. Productivity is economic jargon that simply means how much value we can create with the same amount of time or effort. If one farmer can grow enough to feed 10 people instead of 2, that's a jump in productivity. The same goes for a factory worker making more widgets per hour or a programmer writing code that automates a job. In my case here, if I just happen to be working a classic fake email job, if I can send 2 emails in 10 minutes instead of sending 1 email, then that's a doubling of my productivity. Hooray! Historically, productivity jumps when we gain access to new resources, invent new tools to extract more value from those resources, and crucially, when we capture the labor, land, or data and networks needed to deploy those tools effectively. In short, every leap in living standards has been fueled by some kind of conquest. Land was conquered, people were conquered, information was conquered. That sounds kinda harsh, but history makes it hard to deny. Today, when we speak about these very special instances, like the Industrial Revolution or the Agricultural Revolution, we typically only talk about them in the context of this huge boost in material living standards that they provided over the long term. But what we don't typically talk about is the huge price that was paid for these revolutions, because many people in the past have paid that price, and we're paying it again right now. Let's look at the pattern. According to the consensus of anthropology, over thousands of years from about 10,000 BCE to 3000 BCE, some groups of humans, particularly in Mesopotamia, stopped hunting and gathering and began farming. This is known as the Agricultural Revolution. It was the birth of large-scale civilization, cities, writing, trade, specialization.
But it didn't come cheap. To grow crops at scale, you needed land, and lots of it. This meant laying claim to land that was formerly shared.
You also needed labor, lots of it as well. And early agriculture saw a massive increase in slavery to provide that labor.
Slavery wasn't incidental to civilization, it built it. Ancient Sumer, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, all built by slaves.
Ancient Athens, a city often looked at as a golden bastion of democracy, actually had the largest segment of its population made up of slaves, according to scholarly consensus. In the early agricultural world, this was the norm, not the exception.
You might look back on ancient or medieval history and imagine yourself as a king, a queen, a brave explorer, or a knight. But the reality is, you probably wouldn't have gotten your name in the history book because you would have been too busy shoveling shit for somebody who did.
That's because in the agricultural age, the vast majority of the population was either a slave, a serf, or a peasant of some kind. According to anthropologists like James C. Scott, the primary source of slaves was war captives.
War was central to the agricultural age. It was the very basis of its function.
To grow your economy, you waged war to A, capture more land to grow more crops, and B, to capture more people to work the land you conquered. Yes, agriculture produced more food per acre, which allowed more people to live, but most of these people lived in some form of slavery or bondage, doing hard labor while a small elite took the surplus of their work.
So yeah, if you're just looking at the pure numbers of productivity, of course there was massive economic progress. But the cost of that progress on a human level was also massive. And just like today, most of the real benefits of that economy flowed to a tiny sliver of elites, while the people who enabled those benefits to happen got stomped on.
Fast forward a few thousand years. The next big technological unlock was the Industrial Revolution. Steam engines, factories, railroads, mass production. Between 1760 and 1900, productivity went through the roof.
But again, It wasn't clean. Most people don't know that the Industrial Revolution actually began primarily as textile mills.
Up until the 1860s, the term factory was practically synonymous with these mills. And the mills were built on two very important things: cotton and extremely cheap labor.
Just like the Agricultural Revolution needed land and bodies to function, the Industrial Revolution needed land, bodies, and resources to function, and lots of them.
Britain, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, had just the source of cotton and bodies it needed: vast slave plantations throughout the world. As prominent historian Eric Hobsbawm says, given the right conditions, i.e. conquered resources and human labor, the technical innovations of the Industrial Revolution practically made themselves. And once the revolution was kicked into high gear, colonies were raided for rubber, gold, tin, copper, and oil. The global south was carved up to feed the factories of the global north. Back home in Europe, millions of peasants were turned into factory workers. Many had little or no choice. Their land, which was formerly common land, had been enclosed or seized, so they could no longer support themselves. Their small cottage industries, which had kept them economically independent, were now outcompeted by massive factories.
So, they were forced to become wage workers. And this was the birth of modern wage working. Wage labor wasn't freedom as it's marketed as today. It was dependency.
There's a reason Tyler Durden is such an iconic character.
Our Great War is a spiritual war.
Yes, living standards eventually rose, but only after decades of brutal exploitation. And once again, the massive boost in productivity was mostly captured in the wealth of people who either owned land, people, or resources. For instance, a man named Robert Owens bought out his partners in New Lanark Mills for £84,000 cash, which was 1,680 times the income earned by most British families at the time.
Funnily enough, Owens actually became a huge critic of industry later in his life and even tried to start his very own commune. So yes, it definitely was another economic revolution, but it was also another revolution of control over land, over resources, and over people.
In the 20th century, especially after World War II, North America experienced yet another expansion cycle. This time, not a full-on technological revolution, more of a wave of the Industrial Revolution. That's because new frontiers were opened up. Highways were built, oil was discovered, mines were expanded. In my last video, we did a case study on my hometown of Sudbury, where we looked at how 3 generations, my papa, my dad, and me, all have completely different economic lives. In places like Sudbury, huge deposits of nickel and copper created entire towns almost overnight.
Jobs were plentiful, wages were high, and housing was cheap. But again, this prosperity wasn't neutral. The land that those minerals came from, I'm standing on them right now. I used to pick blueberries as a kid, literally right here. But this mineral-rich and delicious blueberry-rich land wasn't just sitting here waiting for someone to come along and innocently claim it. It belonged to indigenous peoples.
Treaties were often signed under pressure. In many cases, they weren't honored. In 1850, the Robinson-Huron Treaty, one of the main treaties which gave up land to the Crown, clearly stated that the land would be used for mutual benefit. It specifically stated that annual annuity payments would be paid out to each Indigenous person and that those payments would increase with the productivity of the land. But the Crown did not hold up their end of the bargain at all. This annuity has been frozen at $4 per person since 1875. It's like Ricky saying, "I'll pay you 2 toonies to f off."
Lands like the one I'm standing on right now in Sudbury are covered under this treaty. And since 1875, billions and billions of dollars have been created from new mining operations that built cities like Sudbury. And yet, this annuity payment has not been increased at all.
In fact, just recently, this was a huge Superior Court case. While the government had tried to delay or hide from dealing with it for as long as they could, it finally saw its day in court, and judges clearly sided with the First Nations people, landing a $10 billion settlement from the government.
So while what happened in places like Sudbury during the golden age of capitalism wasn't a huge technological revolution, but it was a microcosm of what happens during these huge technological revolutions. Productivity increases massively, living standards do too, but someone pays the price for it. This time, our parents weren't the people paying that price. They weren't the ancient slaves working in the fields. They weren't the medieval peasants forced into the factories. This time, they were still the worker, but they got to taste what it was like to be an owner. And that's because somebody else bore the true cost behind the scenes.
This was the real birth of the modern middle class, a class of people who weren't elite owners, but who also weren't the people who got stomped on.
So when we say that our parents had it better, what we're really describing is the benefits of an expansion cycle, one that's built on discovery, exploitation, and exclusion.
The thing is, these economic bursts don't last forever, and neither does this fleeting middle class group of people. This is the part that they don't teach you in school. There's a basic economic rule that helps explain why things tend to get worse after one of these booms. We introduced this concept last video. It's R greater than G. To refresh, it means that the rate of growth of capital, things like stock, housing, or investments, grows faster than the growth rate of wages. So over time, wealth concentrates at the top. And this is actually an inherent feature of the capitalist system. It's not a bug. Thomas Piketty, the man behind this formula in his landmark book, Capital in the 21st Century, shows how this phenomenon occurred in the 19th century as well as this period after the 1980s or so. In between, during the mid-20th century, this trend actually briefly reversed. Why? It was because of this expansion cycle from new technology being paired with access to new or previously not utilized resources, plus high taxes on the rich, plus strong unions, plus massive government investment. But once this mini economic boom slowed down and the resource frontier narrowed again, things went back to the way they always do, which is capital outpaces labor, and inequality once again surged. This happened in Sudbury. This happened pretty much everywhere.
Since the 1980s, we've been trying to engineer keeping the middle class alive for as long as possible without a new real expansion cycle.
With the land on Earth conquered, the people conquered, the factories built, and the world digitally connected, we've now turned to financial engineering to try and keep the system on life support. We've deregulated the banks. We've slashed interest rates all the way down. We encourage so much debt-fueled consumption, and we offshore so much of the world's labor to the cheapest countries. This kept asset prices rising, stocks, homes, corporate profits, everything. For instance, in the 2000s, cheap credit and deregulation fueled a housing boom that doubled average home prices in under a decade in many regions, but also left millions vulnerable to foreclosure when the bubble burst, causing the Great Recession.
But aside from asset values, wages stagnated, job security collapsed, and housing became unaffordable. And younger generations were left with high prices, high debt, and no assets.
Now the world is looking for its next economic boost, like a drug addict looking for their next hit. And many people think it's arriving right now. artificial intelligence. AI promises massive productivity gains, the likes of which we have never seen. Futurist commentators claim unfathomable prosperity. Maybe it could really be a game changer. But just like every other expansion cycle or revolution throughout history, the question is, who will benefit and who will pay the price? The historical pattern is clear. Each expansion has lifted living standards over the long run, but only alongside some form of exploitation or conquest. Will AI liberate us from economic competition by ushering in a post-scarcity world? Or simply make the current inequalities much, much worse and create a permanent underclass? Will it require new forms of conquest over the entirety of humanity itself? Or can we structure this new wave in a way that avoids making the mistakes we've made in the past?
When people say our parents had it better, they're often tapping into something true. Not because they were better people or not because they were more disciplined, but because they lived during the afterglow of a major expansion cycle. A cycle made possible by land, resources, and at least temporarily, this system was tilted towards the working class of ruling nations. That moment is over. And now we're left with a big question. Will we keep trying to artificially grow through debt and financial speculation? Or will we figure out how to build a new kind of economy, one that doesn't rely on exploitation and conquest? That is the real story behind our generational decline. And maybe, just maybe, the key to turning things around.